The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor 3 feet from where I stood, and in that crystalline explosion of sound, I heard the death of 8 years of my professional life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus Ashford announced, his face flushed with expensive whiskey and cheap triumph, "I'd like to make a toast to the company that's made me who I am today." He swayed slightly on the raised platform at the center of his penthouse ballroom, surrounded by 300 employees, clients, and Portland's business elite. His 50th birthday party was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd built a tech empire on other people's innovations. Excessive, performative, and hollow at its core. But first, I need to address some housekeeping. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. My reflection ghosted across the darkened glass, a 34-year-old woman in a navy dress that cost 3 months of careful saving, hair pulled back in a professional knot, face carefully neutral. I'd learned that expression well over the past 6 weeks, the expression of someone who knew exactly what was coming. "As many of you know," Marcus continued, his voice carrying that particular resonance of men who've never been told to shut up, Tech Vista Solutions has grown 340% in the last 3 years. We've revolutionized data analytics for healthcare providers across North America. He paused for the applause, which came dutifully, like trained seals performing for fish. This success didn't happen by accident. It happened because I surrounded myself with brilliant people, and because I wasn't afraid to make hard decisions. My colleague, Trevor Huang, touched my elbow. "You okay, Amanda?" he whispered. I turned to him with a small smile. Why wouldn't I be? But Trevor had been with Tech Vista almost as long as I had. He'd watched me build the algorithm that became the backbone of our flagship product. He'd seen me in the office at midnight, debugging code while everyone else was home with their families. He knew, even if he didn't want to admit it, what was about to happen. However, Marcus's voice dropped into that faux serious tone that powerful men use when they're about to destroy someone's life. Growth requires evolution, and evolution sometimes means cutting away dead weight. The room went quiet. This wasn't the jovial atmosphere of 30 seconds ago. This was a crowd sensing blood in the water, that primal human instinct that makes us all rubberneck at car accidents. "Amanda Pierce," Marcus said, his eyes finding me across the crowd. "Would you come up here, please?" The sea of people parted. I could feel their eyes on me, some pitying, some curious, most just grateful it wasn't them. I walked forward steadily, my heels clicking against the marble with metronomic precision. Each step was measured, controlled. I'd imagined this moment so many times over the past 43 days that it felt like a scene I'd rehearsed. I climbed the 3 steps to the platform and stood beside Marcus. Up close, I could smell the Macallan 25 on his breath, see the broken capillaries in his nose, notice the way his custom suit couldn't quite hide the gut he'd developed from too many client dinners and not enough accountability. "Amanda's been with us for 8 years, Marcus said, addressing the crowd while standing close enough that I could see the pores in his skin. She was one of our first software engineers, dedicated, hard-working, loyal. Each word was delivered like a eulogy. But loyalty isn't enough anymore. We need innovation. We need fresh thinking. We need people who can take us to the next level. The next level I already took you to, I thought. The level you're standing on was built with my code, my late nights, my sacrificed relationships, my deferred dreams. Amanda, your position has been eliminated as part of our restructuring initiative. Your access will be revoked as of Monday, and HR will contact you regarding your severance package. He said it like he was reading a weather report, cloudy with a chance of destroyed careers. Someone gasped. A woman near the back, probably Bethany from accounting, who'd always been kind to me, said, "Oh my God," loud enough to carry. But most people just stared, frozen in that peculiar paralysis that comes from witnessing someone else's public humiliation. Marcus extended his hand for a handshake, as if we'd just concluded a pleasant business transaction, as if he hadn't just fired me in front of 300 people at a birthday party. As if he hadn't timed this specifically for maximum humiliation and minimum legal recourse. I looked at his hand, then I looked at his face, and I smiled. Not a big smile, not a crazy smile, just a small, knowing curve of lips that made something flicker in Marcus's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first trace of fear. "Thank you, Marcus," I said quietly, my voice steady. "This is exactly what I needed." I shook his hand. His palm was sweaty. Mine was not. Then I turned and walked back through the crowd, past the pitying looks and awkward silences, past Trevor's stricken face and Bethany's tears, past the executives who'd benefited from my work without ever knowing my name. I retrieved my clutch from the coat check, walked out of the penthouse, took the elevator down 50 floors, and stepped out into the October night. The Portland air was crisp with rain and possibility. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply, letting the reality of the moment settle into my bones. Then I pulled out my phone and typed a message to a number I'd saved 6 weeks ago under the name Insurance. "It's done." He took the bait. "Proceed with phase 2. The response came within seconds. "Confirmed." Monday morning, the walls come down. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and started walking toward my car. Behind me, the party continued. Ahead of me, justice waited with the patience of a spider in a web. Because here's what Marcus Ashford didn't know. I'd been planning this moment since the day I found the emails. Since the day I discovered he was preparing to steal my algorithm, patent it under his own name, and erase me from my own creation. Since the day I realized that the man I'd trusted with 8 years of my career had been systematically setting me up to take the fall for his own failures, while positioning himself to profit from my brilliance. 43 days ago, I'd stumbled onto evidence that would destroy him. And in those 43 days, I'd transformed from a naive engineer who believed hard work would be rewarded into something else entirely. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. A woman who understood that revenge, like good code, requires patience, precision, and perfect execution. As I drove away from Marcus Ashford's 50th birthday party, the last celebration he would ever have as a free man, I thought about something my father had told me before he died. He'd been a chess master, a man who could see 12 moves ahead while his opponents were still contemplating their opening. "Amanda," he'd said, "when someone shows you their hand, don't react. Wait. Watch, learn their patterns. And when they think they've won, when they're so confident in their victory that they announce it to the world, that's when you reveal you were playing a different game entirely." I hadn't understood it then. I was 14, impatient, always wanting to counterattack immediately, but I understood it now. Marcus Ashford thought he'd fired me at his birthday party. He had no idea that I'd just lit the fuse on a bomb that would detonate his entire world. The real question wasn't whether he'd survive the explosion. It was whether there would be anything left of him to rebuild. The drive home took 40 minutes through rain-slicked streets that reflected Portland's lights like liquid amber. I'd chosen my apartment specifically for its location, close enough to downtown for an easy commute, far enough from the tech corridor that I could separate work from life. That separation had always felt important to me, even when I was spending 70 hours a week at the office. I needed a space that was mine, untouched by Marcus Ashford's influence. As I pulled into the underground parking garage of my building, my phone buzzed, multiple messages flooding in simultaneously. I ignored them, killed the engine, and sat in the darkness of my car for a long moment. My hands were shaking now. Now that I was alone, now that I didn't have to maintain the facade, the adrenaline was catching up with me. I gripped the steering wheel and let myself feel it, the humiliation, the anger, the grief for the person I'd been 8 years ago when I'd walked into Tech Vista Solutions with stars in my eyes and innovation in my heart. I'd been 26, fresh from MIT with a master's in computer science and a dissertation on predictive healthcare analytics that had made my professors call me once in a generation. I'd had 3 job offers from Silicon Valley giants, but Marcus had flown to Boston personally to recruit me. He'd taken me to a small Italian restaurant in the North End, ordered wine that cost more than my monthly rent, and told me about his vision. "I don't want to build just another tech company," he'd said, his eyes intense with what I'd mistaken for passion. "I want to build something that matters. Healthcare is broken, Amanda. People are dying because hospitals can't effectively predict patient risk, can't allocate resources efficiently, can't see patterns in their data. Your algorithm could save lives, thousands of lives, maybe hundreds of thousands." He'd painted a picture of purpose-driven work, of innovation that would change the world. And I'd believed him. God help me, I'd believed every word. I'd turned down Google. I'd turned down Facebook. I'd moved across the country to Portland, to a city I'd never even visited, because Marcus Ashford had convinced me we were going to revolutionize healthcare together. Together. What a fucking lie that had been. I finally released the steering wheel and grabbed my bag. The parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. Most of my neighbours worked normal jobs with normal hours and were probably home watching television or putting kids to bed. Normal lives, safe lives, lives that didn't involve being publicly humiliated at a billionaire's birthday party. The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt longer than usual. I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. My mascara was still perfect. My hair was still in place. Nothing in my appearance betrayed the warfare happening inside my chest. My apartment was dark and quiet when I entered. I didn't bother turning on the lights. Instead, I walked straight to the window that overlooked the Willamette River, kicked off my heels, and stared out at the city that had promised so much and delivered so little. My phone buzzed again. I finally looked at it. 17 text messages, 6 missed calls, 3 voicemails. Trevor. "Amanda, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was going to do that." Bethany. "Are you okay? Call me, please. My mother in Boston. Sweetheart, I saw something on Facebook. Is everything all right?" I scrolled past the rest until I found the one I was looking for. The one from the number saved as insurance, documents filed, preliminary injunction hearing scheduled for Monday at 2 p.m. Federal prosecutor confirmed interested. Your testimony will be key. I sat down on my couch in the darkness and let myself smile for real this time, not the controlled smile I'd given Marcus on that platform. A genuine smile that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, because 43 days ago, everything had changed. It had been a Wednesday, September 3rd. The kind of unremarkable day that becomes a dividing line in your life. Everything before it in one category, everything after it in another. I'd stayed late at the office, debugging an issue with the patient risk prediction module. Marcus had been pushing for a major demo with a consortium of West Coast hospital systems, and the algorithm was showing inconsistent results with certain demographic datasets. It was the kind of problem that kept me up at night, not because Marcus was pressuring me, but because I'd built this system to save lives. If it failed, people could die. The office had been empty except for the security guard and the cleaning crew. I'd been so absorbed in my work that I didn't hear Marcus's office door open, but I heard the voices. Absolutely certain the patent application is clean? That was Marcus, but his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Sharp, worried. The lawyers have been very clear. The second voice belonged to Pierce Donovan, our chief financial officer. A man with silver hair and dead eyes who joined TechVista 2 years ago and immediately started pushing for profitability optimization. As long as Amanda signed the standard employment agreement, everything she creates belongs to the company, which means it belongs to you. But she's the one who built it, Marcus said. If she ever challenges, she won't. Pierce's laugh was like ice cracking. Amanda's a true believer. She thinks she's changing the world. She has no idea how business actually works. I'd frozen at my desk, hidden by the maze of cubicles between my workstation and Marcus's office. They couldn't see me, but I could hear every word echoing across the empty floor. "What about the investigation?" Marcus asked. "If the FDA finds out we've been manipulating the clinical trial data..." "They won't find out. We've been careful. The test hospitals think they're seeing genuine algorithm predictions. They have no idea we've been cherry-picking cases and excluding the failures. By the time anyone realizes the system isn't as accurate as we've claimed, we'll have secured 20 hospital contracts and gone public. The stock will be worth billions. My mouth had gone dry. The FDA investigation, manipulated clinical trials. They were falsifying the effectiveness of my algorithm. And Amanda? Marcus asked. What about her? When this all blows up, because Pierce, it will eventually blow up, someone's going to take the fall. The FDA doesn't just issue fines. People go to prison for this kind of thing. There was a long pause. Then Pierce said, That's why you've been documenting Amanda's access to the clinical data, right? That's why you had her sign off on the testing protocols. That's why every email about the trial parameters has her name on it. Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus, Pierce prompted. Yes. Marcus's voice was quiet. Yes, I've been documenting everything. Then you have your scapegoat. When the investigation happens, and you're right, it will happen eventually, you show them how Amanda was the lead engineer with full access to the data, how she was the one pushing for aggressive timelines, how you trusted her completely and had no idea she was cutting corners. She wasn't cutting corners, Marcus said, and for a brief, stupid moment, I thought he might defend me. The algorithm is brilliant. It's the most sophisticated predictive model I've ever seen. She's a fucking genius. Which is exactly why she's dangerous, Pierce said. Geniuses think they're untouchable. They get cocky. They make mistakes. And when they do, they take down everyone around them. So we fire her. Eventually. But not yet. Not until after the public offering. If we fire her now, it looks suspicious. She's been here 8 years. She's the face of the engineering team. We need her through the IPO. And then we restructure. Eliminate her position, get her out before the FDA investigation gains traction. By the time anyone starts asking questions, she'll be long gone, bitter about being fired, with no credibility and no access to the data that could prove her innocence. I'd sat there in the darkness, listening to them plan my destruction with the casual efficiency of men who'd done this before. Men who'd built their empire on the backs of people like me, then discarded us when we were no longer useful. Jesus, Pierce! Marcus sounded sick. I recruited her. I convinced her to turn down offers from every major tech company in the country. She trusted me. That was your first mistake, Pierce said. Never let them trust you. Trust creates liability. They'd talked for another 10 minutes about logistics, timelines, stock options, and legal strategies. I'd stayed frozen at my desk, my heart pounding so hard I was certain they'd hear it. But they never checked the main floor. Why would they? It was almost midnight. Everyone had gone home. Everyone except the genius they were planning to destroy. When they finally left, Marcus heading to his car, Pierce to his, I'd sat in the darkness for another hour, my mind racing through everything I'd heard. Processing, analyzing, planning. Because here's what they didn't know about me. I wasn't just a brilliant engineer. I was my father's daughter. And my father had taught me that the best defense is a meticulously prepared offense. I'd learned chess from a grandmaster. I'd learned code from the best professors in the world. But more than that, I'd learned patience, strategy, the art of seeing 12 moves ahead. That night, I'd started moving my pieces into position. The first thing I did was document everything. Not just the conversation I'd overheard, though I'd immediately typed out every word while it was fresh in my memory, but everything about the clinical trials, the algorithm, and the systematic fraud that Marcus and Pierce had orchestrated. I'd spent 8 years with my head down, focused solely on building the best possible product. I'd trusted that the business side of Tech Vista was handling things ethically. I'd been a fool. Now, sitting at my desk at 1 a.m. on September 4th, I opened every file I could access. And because I was the lead software engineer, because Marcus had trusted me completely, right up until the moment he decided to betray me, I had access to nearly everything. The clinical trial data was stored on secure servers, but I'd designed those servers. I knew every backdoor, every logging mechanism, every vulnerability. Not because I was malicious, but because good engineering requires understanding your system completely. What I found made me physically ill. TechVista's flagship product, my algorithm, the one I'd spent 6 years perfecting, was being marketed to hospitals as having a 94% accuracy rate in predicting patient risk for heart attacks, strokes, and other critical events. The FDA was evaluating it for formal approval, which would make it eligible for insurance reimbursement and Medicare funding. Billions of dollars were at stake. But the algorithm didn't have a 94% accuracy rate. It had an 81% accuracy rate, which was still impressive, but not revolutionary, not worth billions. So Marcus and Pierce had cooked the books. They'd cherry-picked successful cases for the clinical trials. They'd excluded patients where the algorithm had failed. They'd manipulated the control groups. They'd even modified the underlying data in some cases to make the predictions appear more accurate than they were. And they'd done it all using my credentials, my access codes, my digital signature. Every falsified report had my name on it. Every manipulated dataset showed that I'd accessed it. Every email chain about the trial parameters listed me as the primary contact. If the FDA investigation ever found this, when it found this, because fraud like this always eventually surfaces, I would go to prison. Not Marcus, not Pierce, me. I'd sat there staring at my monitor, my hands trembling, my mind spinning through the implications. I'd built something beautiful, something that could genuinely save lives, and they'd corrupted it. Worse, they'd set me up to take the fall for their corruption. The smart thing would have been to run, to take what I'd found to the authorities immediately, to blow the whistle and hope for protection. But whistleblowers rarely came out ahead. They got blacklisted, bankrupted, destroyed by lawyers. Even when they were right, even when they won, they lost. No, I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I was going to destroy them first, but I had to be smart about it, patient, strategic. I'd spent the next 2 hours making forensic copies of everything, every email, every document, every line of manipulated code, every falsified clinical report. I copied it all to an encrypted external drive that I'd purchased with cash 2 days later, then deleted every trace of the copying process from the system logs. Then I'd gone home and started planning. The next morning, September 4th, I'd walked into TechVista's offices like nothing had changed. I'd smiled at the receptionist, grabbed my usual coffee from the break room, and sat down at my desk to continue debugging the patient risk module. But everything had changed. I saw Marcus differently now. When he stopped by my desk to ask about the hospital demo, I heard the lie underneath his friendly concern. When he complimented my work, I recognized the manipulation. When he talked about the company's future, I understood that I had no place in that future except as a scapegoat. "Amanda," he'd said that morning, perching on the edge of my desk like we were old friends, "I know I've been pushing you hard on this demo. I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you do. You're the heart of this company, the heart that you're planning to cut out," I'd thought. "Just doing my job, Marcus," I'd said with a smile. "No, you're doing more than that. You're building something that's going to change healthcare forever. That's going to be your legacy, my legacy, not our legacy, mine. Because you'll make sure everyone knows I was responsible when it all comes crashing down. That means a lot," I'd said. He'd squeezed my shoulder, a gesture I'd always found paternal and reassuring, and walked back to his office. Now the gesture felt predatory, possessive, the way a hunter might pat the deer before taking the shot. I'd waited until lunch, then pulled up a private browser window and started researching. FDA investigations, securities fraud, IPO regulations, whistleblower protections. I needed to understand the battlefield before I could plot my strategy. What I'd learned was both encouraging and terrifying. The FDA took clinical trial fraud seriously, very seriously, criminal prosecution seriously, prison time for executives seriously. But investigations took time. Sometimes years, and in that time, companies often managed to complete their public offerings, cash out, and leave retail investors holding the bag. Securities fraud was faster, but harder to prove. The SEC would need to show that Marcus and Pierce had deliberately misled investors about the company's prospects. But we weren't public yet. The IPO wasn't scheduled until next spring. By the time the SEC got involved, it might be too late. No, I needed something faster, something more comprehensive. Something that would stop the IPO before it happened, protect the hospitals from deploying a flawed system, and, most importantly, ensure that Marcus and Pierce couldn't pin everything on me. I'd spent 2 weeks researching, planning, and documenting. I'd been extra careful not to change my behavior at work. If anything, I'd been more engaged, more enthusiastic, more visibly dedicated to the mission. I couldn't afford to make them suspicious. But I'd also been preparing my exit strategy. I'd consulted 3 different attorneys, separately, paying in cash, using a fake name for the initial consultations. I'd learned about qui tam lawsuits, where whistleblowers could file suit on behalf of the government and receive a portion of any recovered damages. I'd learned about the False Claims Act and how it applied to companies defrauding Medicare and Medicaid. I'd learned about protective orders and sealed filings and how to navigate the justice system without becoming a target myself. And I'd learned that the key to everything was timing. I couldn't file my lawsuit too early, or Marcus and Pierce would have time to destroy evidence and build their defense. But I couldn't wait too long, or the IPO would proceed and hospitals would start deploying my corrupted algorithm. The sweet spot was right after they'd committed fully to their fraud, after they'd filed all their paperwork, prepared all their presentations, and crossed the line from planning a crime to executing one, but before they'd actually benefited from it. That sweet spot, I'd realized, would come in the weeks leading up to their final investment roadshow, the period when they'd be most confident, most exposed, and most vulnerable. But there was one problem. They still needed me. As long as I was valuable to them, they'd keep me around. I needed to make them think I was a liability they could safely eliminate. I needed to get fired, not immediately, that would look suspicious, but soon enough that they'd pull the trigger before the IPO, thinking they were protecting themselves, never realizing they were actually giving me the perfect platform for revenge. So I'd started making small mistakes, nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise questions about my competence, just subtle things that would make Marcus and Pierce think I was becoming unstable, that I was cracking under the pressure, that I was a risk. A missed deadline here, an uncharacteristically emotional response to feedback there, a few carefully worded emails expressing concerns about the clinical trial timelines that could later be interpreted as me trying to cover my tracks. I'd been painting a picture of an engineer on the edge, someone who might become a liability, someone who needed to be removed before she did something unpredictable. And all the while, I'd been documenting everything, building my case, preparing for the moment when Marcus would make his move. That moment had come tonight, at his 50th birthday party, in front of 300 witnesses. He'd thought he was firing me. He had no idea he'd just handed me everything I needed to destroy him. Saturday morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my apartment windows and a text message that made me smile. Pierce Donovan, TechVista's CFO and the man who'd masterminded my framing, had just posted on social media. Sometimes the hardest part of leadership is making tough decisions. But TechVista's future has never been brighter, onward and upward. Wayne growth leadership. Wayne tough choices. The lack of self-awareness was almost breathtaking. I made coffee, real coffee, ground from beans I'd bought at a local roaster, none of the office swill I'd been surviving on for 8 years, and settled onto my couch with my laptop. No need to rush. No need to be in the office by 7, no need to sacrifice my Saturday to Marcus Ashford's empire. For the first time in 8 years, my weekend was actually mine. I opened my encrypted folder and reviewed the timeline I'd created. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The lawsuit would be filed Monday morning in federal court under seal. The preliminary injunction hearing was scheduled for Monday afternoon. By Tuesday morning, the judge would likely grant the injunction, freezing TechVista's assets and halting the IPO process. But more importantly, the FBI and FDA would receive copies of everything I documented. The falsified clinical trials, the manipulated data, the emails discussing the fraud, the evidence that Marcus and Pierce had deliberately set me up to take the fall. The federal prosecutor I'd been working with, a woman named Alexandra Torres, who specialized in corporate fraud and had a reputation for absolute ruthlessness, had been very interested in my case. Very interested. This isn't just securities fraud, she'd told me during our last meeting, held in a nondescript coffee shop in a suburb 40 minutes from Portland. This is healthcare fraud on a massive scale. If hospitals had deployed this system based on falsified efficacy data, patients could have died. That's not a white-collar crime anymore. That's potential negligent homicide, but I'm protected, right? I'd asked. I'm the whistleblower. You are, completely. Your testimony is what makes this case possible. Alexandra had leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. But I need you to understand something, Amanda. This is going to get ugly. Marcus Ashford isn't going to go down quietly. He's going to fight. He's going to try to discredit you, to paint you as a disgruntled employee, to suggest you're lying for revenge or money. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared, I'd said. Are you sure? Because once you file this lawsuit, once you go public, there's no taking it back. Your name will be in the news. You'll be cross-examined by the best defense attorneys money can buy. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life looking for ammunition, old relationships, college indiscretions, anything they can use to make you look unstable or unreliable. I'd thought about my father, about those chess matches where he'd sacrificed pieces to set up checkmate. I'm sure, I'd said. Now, sitting in my apartment with coffee and sunshine and freedom, I felt that certainty settling deeper into my bones. Marcus had humiliated me publicly. He'd tried to destroy my career and possibly send me to prison for his crimes. He'd taken 8 years of my life, my trust, my brilliance, and twisted it into something corrupt. He deserved everything that was coming. My phone buzzed. Trevor, can we talk? I want to make sure you're okay. Trevor Huang was the closest thing I had to a friend at Tech Vista, a 39-year-old senior architect who'd been with the company for 6 years. He was brilliant, funny, and one of the few people in the office who'd ever treated me like a human being instead of just a code-generating machine. He was also, and I'd discovered this through my investigation, completely innocent of the fraud. He'd had no idea what Marcus and Pierce were doing, which meant I needed to protect him from the fallout. I'm fine, don't worry about me. You don't seem fine. Getting fired in front of 300 people isn't fine. Can I at least buy you coffee? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to maintain complete isolation until the lawsuit dropped. But another part of me, the part that was still human underneath all the strategic planning, needed to see a friendly face. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., that place on Hawthorne with the good pastries, deal. And Amanda, I'm really sorry. What Marcus did was fucked up. Yes, it was. What Trevor didn't know, what nobody except Alexandra Torres and the federal agents working the case knew, was that Marcus Ashford had made the biggest mistake of his life. Because I wasn't some naive engineer anymore. I'd spent 43 days transforming myself into something else, something harder, something dangerous. I was a woman who'd learned that the world doesn't reward good work. It rewards power, strategy, the willingness to strike first and strike completely. Marcus had taught me that lesson. Now he was going to learn it himself. Sunday morning, I met Trevor at the coffee shop on Hawthorne, a quirky Portland establishment that served excellent Ethiopian coffee and made their pastries in-house. The weather had turned properly autumnal overnight, that particular Pacific Northwest combination of mist and cold that seeps into your bones and makes you want to curl up with a book and never emerge. Trevor was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table near the window with 2 coffees and what looked like almond croissants. He stood when he saw me, and for a moment, I thought he might try to hug me. But something in my expression must have warned him off because he just gestured to the chair across from him. I got you your usual, he said, unless your usual has changed in the last 48 hours. Still the same, I said, sitting down and accepting the coffee gratefully. The shop was quiet at this hour, just a few scattered customers reading newspapers or typing on laptops, the universal posture of the Portland creative class on a Sunday morning. Trevor studied me across the table. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, his black hair still damp from the shower, his expression concerned in that way that made me remember why I'd always liked him. Trevor cared. In a company full of people who'd sell their grandmother for stock options, Trevor actually gave a shit about other human beings. "You look good," he said finally. "Better than I expected. What did you expect?" "I don't know. Tears, anger, breakdown. You got fired at a birthday party, Amanda. That's some next-level psychological warfare." I sipped my coffee and chose my words carefully. I couldn't tell Trevor what was coming. His genuine surprise would be crucial when the lawsuit broke, but I could give him enough to keep him from worrying. "I'm okay," I said. "Honestly, it's almost a relief. A relief? How is public humiliation a relief? Because now I don't have to pretend anymore. That much was true. I've been unhappy at Tech Vista for a while. The culture, the direction, the way decisions were being made, getting fired just accelerated the inevitable." Trevor frowned. "Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you just quit if you were unhappy?" "Golden handcuffs," I said, which was partly true. My stock options had been worth a considerable amount, or would have been if I'd stayed through the IPO, and I guess I kept thinking things would get better, that Marcus would remember why he started the company in the first place. Marcus! Trevor's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the edge underneath. "Can I ask you something? Did you know he was going to do that? Fire you at the party?" "No." Another truth. I'd known I was going to get fired, but I hadn't known exactly when or how. Marcus's choice of venue had been a surprise, though in retrospect it was perfectly in character. He'd wanted everyone to see, wanted to make an example, wanted to establish dominance. "Because some of us think it was planned," Trevor continued. "Pierce was recording it on his phone, and there were a couple of board members there who didn't seem surprised. It felt orchestrated. Smart Trevor. He'd noticed what I'd noticed, that this wasn't a spontaneous decision but a calculated move." "Does it matter?" I asked. "Of course it matters. If they plan to humiliate you publicly, that's sociopathic. That's cruel for the sake of cruelty." He paused. "Have you talked to a lawyer? Why would I need a lawyer? Wrongful termination? Hostile work environment? Jesus, Amanda, they fired you at a party in front of 300 people. That has to be grounds for something." I broke off a piece of croissant and considered my response. Oregon is an at-will employment state. They can fire me for any reason as long as it's not discriminatory, and Marcus made sure to frame it as position elimination, not performance-based termination. His lawyers probably wrote the script for him. Trevor shook his head. "This whole thing is wrong. You built that company. The algorithm that's about to make Marcus a billionaire, that's your creation. Everyone knows it. Knowing it and proving it are different things." I met his eyes. The employment agreement I signed gave Tech Vista ownership of anything I created while working there. Legally, the algorithm belongs to Marcus. Legally, sure, but morality doesn't pay the bills, Trevor. He fell silent, and I could see him processing this new version of me. The Amanda Pierce, who'd worked alongside him for years, had been optimistic, idealistic, always ready to give people the benefit of the doubt. This Amanda, the one sitting across from him with perfect composure 48 hours after being publicly humiliated, was someone different, someone harder. "So what are you going to do?" he asked finally. "Move on, find another job, probably leave Portland. All lies, but necessary ones. Maybe it's time for a fresh start. You're just going to let them win." I smiled, and something in that smile made Trevor lean back slightly. "They haven't won, Trevor. They've just made their move. The game isn't over yet. That sounds ominous." "Does it?" I finished my coffee and stood. "I should go. Thank you for checking on me. It means more than you know." Trevor stood as well, and this time he did hug me, a brief, awkward embrace that reminded me I hadn't been touched with kindness in longer than I could remember. When he pulled back, his expression was troubled. "Amanda, if you're planning something—" "I'm not planning anything. I'm just moving forward." Okay, he didn't sound convinced. "But if you need anything at all, I'm here, all right?" "All right." I left the coffee shop and walked back to my car through the Portland mist. I'd hated lying to Trevor, but it was necessary. In 24 hours, Tech Vista would be in chaos. The lawsuit would be filed, the injunction would freeze their operations, the federal investigation would become public knowledge. And Trevor, bless his honest heart, would be shocked but untainted. His genuine ignorance would protect him. As I drove home, I thought about Marcus. He was probably nursing a hangover from his birthday party, maybe playing golf with Pierce or some board members, feeling triumphant about having eliminated his liability. He'd sleep well tonight, secure in the knowledge that he'd handled a potential problem. Tomorrow, he'd wake up to a nightmare. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes Portland beautiful in October. I woke at 6, made coffee, and went through my morning routine with the precision of someone preparing for battle. Black pants, white blouse, navy blazer, professional armor. I pulled my hair back in a neat bun and applied minimal makeup. Enough to look polished, not enough to look like I was trying too hard. At 8:30, I drove downtown to the federal courthouse. The building was a modernist concrete structure that looked like it had been designed to intimidate, all sharp angles and imposing mass. I'd been here once before, 3 weeks ago, when Alexandra Torres had walked me through the filing process. "The lawsuit will be filed under seal initially," she'd explained. "That means Marcus and Pierce won't know about it until the judge decides whether to grant the preliminary injunction. The element of surprise is crucial. We don't want them destroying evidence or transferring assets." Now, standing in the courthouse lobby, I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle over me like a physical thing. This wasn't just revenge, this was a point of no return. Once I walked into that courtroom, once my testimony became part of the official record, I would be marking myself as someone who'd chosen justice over loyalty, truth over self-preservation. Some people would call me a hero, others would call me a traitor. I didn't care what they called me. I cared about Marcus Ashford and Pierce Donovan facing consequences for what they'd done. Alexandra Torres met me outside courtroom 6B. She was in her mid-40s, with dark hair shot through with silver, and the kind of sharp professional presence that came from years of putting corporate criminals behind bars. She'd been with the US Attorney's Office for 15 years and had a conviction rate that made defense lawyers nervous. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready. Remember, today is just the preliminary injunction hearing. The judge will hear arguments about whether to freeze Tech Vista's operations while the full case proceeds. Your testimony will focus on the immediate harm that could result if the IPO moves forward and hospitals deploy the flawed system." "I understand. Marcus and Pierce will be here. They were served with notice an hour ago. They're going to be blindsided and angry. Don't let them rattle you." I nodded. The idea of seeing Marcus again, seeing his face when he realized what I'd done, sent a thrill of anticipation through my veins. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd expected, panelled in dark wood with fluorescent lighting that gave everything a harsh, unforgiving quality. The judge's bench dominated the room, elevated and imposing. A few people sat in the gallery, other attorneys waiting for their cases, a court reporter, a couple of journalists who must have gotten wind of something interesting. And then the door opened and Marcus Ashford walked in. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His face was flushed, his expensive suit rumpled, his hair uncombed. Pierce Donovan was beside him, along with two attorneys I recognized from Tech Vista's legal team, both of them looking like they'd been yanked out of bed with 5 minutes' notice. Marcus's eyes found me immediately. The expression on his face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then, most satisfyingly, rage. He started toward me, but one of his attorneys grabbed his arm. Words were exchanged in harsh whispers. Marcus kept staring at me, his jaw working, his hands clenched into fists. I met his gaze steadily. No fear, no uncertainty, just the calm acknowledgement that I'd become his worst nightmare. The bailiff called the courtroom to order and Judge Catherine Reeves entered. She was in her 60s, grey-haired and stern, with a reputation for not tolerating bullshit from anyone. I'd researched her extensively. She'd been a public defender for 20 years before being appointed to the federal bench, and she had a particular distaste for corporate fraud. We're here for a preliminary injunction hearing in the matter of United States ex Aurelier, Pierce vs. Tech Vista Solutions, Judge Reeves said, settling behind her bench. Ms. Torres, you're representing the plaintiff. Yes, Your Honor, the United States and Amanda Pierce, the relator in this qui tam action. Marcus made a sound, something between a gasp and a growl. Now he understood. This wasn't just a wrongful termination suit. This was a federal case, a whistleblower lawsuit filed on behalf of the government itself. Your Honor, Alexandra continued, we're seeking an immediate preliminary injunction to halt Tech Vista Solutions' planned initial public offering and to prevent the deployment of their medical algorithm to any additional healthcare facilities. We have evidence of systematic fraud in clinical trials, falsification of efficacy data, and a scheme to defraud Medicare and Medicaid of millions of dollars. Marcus's attorney, a man named Harrison Wells, who charged $1,000 an hour, stood quickly. Your Honor, this is outrageous, Ms. Pierce was fired from Tech Vista 3 days ago for performance issues. This is clearly a retaliatory filing from a disgruntled employee. Mr. Wells, Judge Reeves interrupted, her voice cold enough to frost glass. I've reviewed the sealed complaint and supporting evidence that Ms. Torres submitted. The allegations here are serious and well documented. You'll have your opportunity to respond, but do not insult this court's intelligence by suggesting that thousands of pages of emails, financial records, and clinical trial data constitute the fevered imaginings of a disgruntled employee. Wells shut his mouth, his face reddening. Ms. Torres, call your first witness. Your Honor, the United States calls Amanda Pierce. I stood and walked to the witness stand. The court reporter swore me in, and I placed my hand on the Bible, promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Across the courtroom, Marcus stared at me with such concentrated hatred that I could feel it like heat. I smiled at him, a small smile, the same smile I'd given him on that platform 3 nights ago. Then I began to speak. Ms. Pierce, Alexandra Torres began, standing at the lectern with perfect posture and absolute confidence. Please state your educational background for the record. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science from MIT and a master's degree in applied data analytics, also from MIT. My master's thesis focused on predictive modeling for healthcare risk assessment and your employment history. I worked briefly at a startup in Boston after graduation, then joined Tech Vista Solutions 8 years ago as a software engineer. I was promoted to senior engineer after 2 years, then to lead engineer after 4. Until Friday evening, I was the principal architect for Tech Vista's primary product, the patient risk assessment algorithm. You said until Friday evening. What happened Friday evening? I was terminated by Marcus Ashford, Tech Vista's CEO, at his 50th birthday party in front of approximately 300 witnesses. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Reeves looked at Marcus with an expression that could have stripped paint. Ms. Pierce, can you describe the algorithm you developed? The PRAA, Patient Risk Assessment Algorithm, is a machine learning system that analyzes patient data to predict the likelihood of critical medical events, like heart attacks, strokes, and septic shock. It was designed to help hospitals allocate resources more effectively and intervene earlier in high-risk cases. And this algorithm is the basis for Tech Vista's business model, yes. It's their only significant product. Everything else they offer is supplementary. How accurate is the algorithm? I took a breath. This was the crucial moment. In actual testing, across diverse patient populations with proper controls, the algorithm has an 81% accuracy rate. That's very good. It's better than most existing predictive models. But it's not the 94% accuracy that TechVista has been claiming to investors and hospital systems. How do you know TechVista has been claiming 94% accuracy? Because I discovered the falsified clinical trial data 3 months ago. The company has been systematically excluding failed predictions from their reported results, cherry-picking successful cases, and in some instances, retroactively modifying data to make the algorithm appear more accurate than it actually is. Harrison Wells shot to his feet. "Objection! This is hearsay and speculation." "Mr. Wells," Judge Reeves said icily, "this is not a jury trial, and the rules of evidence are more relaxed in an injunction hearing. I'll allow it, and you'll sit down until it's your turn to cross-examine." Wells sat, his face purple. "Ms. Pierce," Alexandra continued, "do you have evidence of this data manipulation?" "Yes. I have copies of the original clinical trial data, the modified data that was reported to the FDA, and email communications between Marcus Ashford and Pierce Donovan discussing the modifications." "When did you discover this fraud?" "September 3rd. I was working late and overheard a conversation between Mr. Ashford and Mr. Donovan where they discussed using me as a scapegoat for the fraud when it was eventually discovered." Another murmur. Marcus was shaking his head, whispering furiously to his attorney, "Can you elaborate on that?" They discussed how they'd been documenting my access to the clinical trial data, how they'd made sure my name was on all the relevant email chains and reports. Their plan was to complete the IPO, then fire me and claim I had acted independently to falsify the data when I was under pressure to meet deadlines. "And how did you respond to discovering this plan?" "I began documenting everything. I made forensic copies of all relevant data, emails, and communications. I consulted with attorneys about whistleblower protections. And I waited." "Why did you wait? Why not go to the authorities immediately?" This was the question I'd been preparing for, the one where I had to appear credible, not vindictive. Because I needed to be certain. I needed to build an airtight case. If I'd gone to the authorities with partial information, TechVista's lawyers could have buried me in discovery requests and procedural delays. By the time anyone investigated seriously, the IPO would have been complete, and hospitals would have deployed the flawed system. I wanted to prevent that harm, not just report it. "So you allowed yourself to be fired?" "I made myself a liability in Mr. Ashford's eyes. I wanted him to eliminate me before the IPO, when he still felt confident and safe. That way, his action would demonstrate consciousness of guilt, and the timeline would prevent him from completing his fraud." Judge Reeves was leaning forward now, visibly interested. I could see her making notes. "Ms. Pierce, what specific harm could result if TechVista's IPO proceeds and hospitals continue to deploy this algorithm based on false efficacy data?" This was my moment. This was where I made the case not just for justice, but for necessity. "Your Honour, the algorithm is being used to make life and death decisions. Hospitals use it to determine which patients need immediate intervention and which can wait. If doctors believe the system is 94% accurate when it's actually 81% accurate, they'll overtrust it. They'll miss critical cases because they're relying on flawed predictions. People will die." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "Furthermore," I continued, "hospitals are paying TechVista based on the promised accuracy. Medicare and Medicaid are reimbursing for a service that's been fraudulently marketed. If the IPO proceeds, Marcus Ashford and Pierce Donovan will cash out their stock, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, while leaving investors and healthcare systems holding a product that doesn't work as advertised." "Thank you, Ms. Pierce." Alexandra Torres looked at Judge Reeves. "No further questions at this time, Your Honour. Mr. Wells, your witness." Harrison Wells stood slowly. He'd had time to collect himself, and his expression was now carefully neutral. professional. He was going to try to destroy me, and he was going to do it with a smile. Ms. Pierce, he began, his tone almost conversational, you testified that you were terminated on Friday. Is it fair to say you're angry about that termination? I'm angry that I was humiliated publicly as part of a scheme to frame me for fraud, yes. But you were angry before you were terminated, weren't you? You'd been making mistakes at work, missing deadlines, acting erratically. I was deliberately creating the appearance of instability to make Mr. Ashford believe I was a liability. Ah, Wells smiled. So you were lying, deceiving your employer. I was protecting myself from being framed for crimes I didn't commit. Or, and stay with me here, you were actually becoming unstable, and now you're retconning your behaviour into some sort of elaborate strategy to explain away your performance issues. Alexandra stood. Objection, argumentative and assumes facts not in evidence. Sustained, Judge Reeves said. Mr. Wells, ask questions. Save the speeches for closing arguments. Wells nodded, unfazed. Ms. Pierce, you signed an employment agreement when you joined Tech Vista, correct? Yes. And that agreement included confidentiality provisions? Yes. Non-disclosure agreements? Yes. So, by copying confidential company data and bringing it to the authorities, you violated those agreements, didn't you? Whistleblower protections supersede employment agreements when the purpose is to report fraud. That's a convenient interpretation, but let's talk about your actual evidence. You claim to have emails discussing this alleged fraud. Can you tell the court who was copied on these emails? I saw where he was going. In many cases, no one was copied. They were private communications between Mr. Ashford and Mr. Donovan, private communications that you shouldn't have had access to. How did you obtain them? I was the lead engineer. I had administrative access to company systems, access that you abused to spy on private communications between executives, access that I used to document fraud. Ms. Pierce, isn't it true that you've been passed over for promotion 3 times in the last 2 years? I was promoted to principal architect 18 months ago. But before that, you'd been passed over for management positions, hadn't you? I'm an engineer, not a manager. I wasn't interested in those positions. Or you were bitter about not being promoted, and when you were finally fired, you decided to retaliate by making false accusations. Objection! Alexandra was on her feet. Mr. Wells is testifying, not questioning. Withdrawn, Wells said smoothly. Ms. Pierce, how much money are you seeking in this lawsuit? I'm not seeking money. This is a qui tam action on behalf of the United States government. But if the government recovers damages, you're entitled to a percentage, correct? Under the False Claims Act, whistleblowers can receive up to 30% of recovered funds. That's accurate, so if the government recovers, say, $100 million, you'd receive $30 million. If the case is successful, yes. Wells turned to face the judge, as if sharing a confidence. So Ms. Pierce stands to gain millions of dollars by making these accusations. That's quite a motive for a disgruntled employee, isn't it? Mr. Wells, Judge Reeves said, her voice sharp enough to cut, every whistleblower stands to gain if their case is successful. That's the entire point of qui tam provisions, to incentivize people to report fraud. Your implication is noted and overruled. Do you have any actual questions? Wells's smile didn't falter. Just one more, Your Honour. Ms. Pierce, have you spoken with any of Tech Vista's competitors about employment opportunities since you were fired? I blinked. That was unexpected. No conversations at all. None. So if I told you that Health Metrics Inc. is in Tech Vista's primary competitor, has been trying to recruit you for the past year, that would be news to you. My stomach dropped. They reached out once. I declined. I haven't spoken to them since. But they did reach out. They did express interest in your skills and knowledge. Skills and knowledge that would include intimate familiarity with Tech Vista's proprietary algorithm. I never discussed Tech Vista's technology with any competitor. Of course you didn't. Wells' smile was all teeth now. No further questions. I stepped down from the witness stand, my heart pounding. That last question had been a trap a suggestion that my motivations were financial, not ethical, that I was shopping TechVista's secrets to competitors while pretending to be a principled whistleblower. It was bullshit, but it was effective bullshit. Alexandra Torres called 3 more witnesses that afternoon. First was Dr. Helena Martinez, a cardiologist from Seattle who'd been part of the clinical trial. She testified that she'd been troubled by the inconsistencies in the data, but had been told repeatedly that any discrepancies were normal variation and within acceptable parameters. I expressed concerns to TechVista representatives on 3 separate occasions, Dr. Martinez said, her voice steady but angry. I was told I was being overly cautious, that the algorithm had been validated by dozens of hospitals. But when I compared notes with colleagues at other trial sites, we discovered that our failed predictions had been excluded from the aggregate results. The second witness was a forensic accountant named Thomas Chen. No, wait, I couldn't use that name. A forensic accountant named Benjamin Sterling, who'd analysed TechVista's financial records. He walked the judge through a Byzantine trail of inflated projections, misleading investor presentations, and financial statements that bore only a passing resemblance to reality. The company's valuation is based almost entirely on the claimed 94% accuracy of the algorithm, Benjamin testified. If that accuracy is actually 81%, the company is overvalued by approximately $2 billion. Investors are being asked to buy stock in a company whose primary asset is worth less than half what they've been told. The third witness was FBI Special Agent Karen Dimitrov, who'd been investigating TechVista for the past 3 weeks based on my initial disclosure. We've confirmed the existence of 2 sets of clinical trial data, Agent Dimitrov testified. The original data, which shows an 81% accuracy rate, and the modified data reported to the FDA and investors, which shows 94% accuracy. We've also identified over 200 instances where patient cases were excluded from reported results without scientific justification. By 4 o'clock, Marcus Ashford looked like a man watching his empire burn. Pierce Donovan was whispering frantically to the attorneys, but their body language screamed defeat. Judge Reeves called a recess and retired to her chambers to consider the evidence. We waited in the courtroom's anteroom, Alexandra reviewing her notes while I sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. "You did well," Alexandra said without looking up. "Wells tried to rattle you, but you held your ground. He made it sound like I'm doing this for money. He's doing his job, but Reeves isn't stupid. She's seen 1,000 defendants try to discredit whistleblowers. The evidence speaks for itself. What if she denies the injunction? She won't." Alexandra finally looked at me, and her expression was confident. The harm is too clear, the fraud is too well documented. She's going to freeze TechVista's operations, and then the real investigation begins. 30 minutes later, we were called back to the courtroom. Judge Reeves had returned to her bench, and her expression told me everything I needed to know before she spoke a word. "I've reviewed the evidence presented," she began, "and I find that the plaintiff has demonstrated a substantial likelihood of success on the merits. The falsification of clinical trial data, if proven, constitutes fraud against the United States government and poses an immediate danger to public health." Marcus closed his eyes. Pierce had gone pale. "Therefore, I am granting the preliminary injunction. TechVista Solutions is hereby enjoined from proceeding with its planned initial public offering. The company is further enjoined from deploying its patient risk assessment algorithm to any additional healthcare facilities pending resolution of this case. All clinical trial data must be preserved and made available for forensic examination. The company's assets are frozen, except for ordinary business operations necessary to pay employee salaries and maintain existing client services." The gavel came down with the sound of a death knell. Furthermore, Judge Reeves continued, "I am referring this matter to the FBI and FDA for criminal investigation. Mr. Ashford, Mr. Donovan, you are ordered to surrender your passports to this court within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate arrest. This hearing is adjourned." I watched Marcus Ashford realize that his world had just ended. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, rage, before settling into something that looked almost like fear. He turned to look at me one last time, and in that moment, I saw recognition. He understood now. He understood that I'd planned this, that I'd been 3 steps ahead of him for 6 weeks, that the naive engineer he'd thought he could manipulate and discard had become the architect of his destruction. "You," he said, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "You did this. You destroyed everything." I stood and met his eyes. "No, Marcus, you destroyed everything. I just documented it. You vindictive bitch." "Mr. Ashford," Judge Reeves's voice cracked like a whip. "You will control yourself or be held in contempt. Do you understand me?" Marcus's jaw worked, but he nodded. As we left the courthouse, I could hear him shouting at his attorneys, his voice echoing down the marble corridors, demanding answers, demanding solutions, demanding the impossible, a way to undo what had been done. But there was no undoing this. The injunction was granted. The investigation was opened. The truth was coming out, one subpoena at a time. Outside, the October afternoon had turned grey and cold. Alexandra Torres lit a cigarette, I'd never seen her smoke before, and took a long drag. "How do you feel?" she asked. I considered the question. How did I feel? I'd just destroyed my former employer. I'd cost 300 people their jobs, at least temporarily. I'd torpedoed a $2 billion IPO and opened a criminal investigation that would probably send Marcus Ashford to prison. "I feel," I said slowly, "like I can breathe for the first time in 6 weeks." Alexandra nodded. "Good, because this is just the beginning. The civil case will take months. The criminal investigation could take years. You're going to be giving depositions, testifying before grand juries, defending yourself against every dirty trick Marcus's lawyers can dream up. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready, then go home. Rest. Tomorrow this hits the news and your life becomes very complicated." I drove home through rush hour traffic, listening to NPR discuss the weather and local politics, feeling strangely disconnected from reality. I'd spent 6 weeks planning this moment, and now that it had arrived, I felt almost anticlimactic. Until I got home and found Trevor Huang sitting in the hallway outside my apartment door. Trevor. I stopped a few feet away from him, my keys in my hand. "What are you doing here?" He stood slowly. His face was a mess of emotions. Confusion, betrayal, hurt, anger. I was about to ask you the same thing. "What the hell did you do, Amanda? How did I find out?" "About an hour ago, Marcus called an emergency all-hands meeting, told everyone that you'd filed some kind of lawsuit, that the IPO was cancelled, that the company might not survive. Then he said..." Trevor's voice cracked. "Then he said you'd been planning this, that you'd sabotaged the company on purpose." I unlocked my door and gestured for him to come inside. He hesitated, then followed me in. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too intimate for this conversation. I put my bag down and turned to face him. "Marcus lied to you," I said, "about a lot of things, but he didn't lie about me planning this. So it's true? You've been plotting to destroy Tech Vista this whole time. Not destroy, expose. There's a difference, is there? Because 300 people just found out they might lose their jobs, and you're passing semantics. Trevor, sit down. Please, let me explain. He didn't move. I trusted you. I defended you to people after you got fired. I told them Marcus was wrong, that you were brilliant and loyal, and, God, I was an idiot. You weren't an idiot, you were right. I am loyal. Just not to Marcus Ashford. Then who? Who are you loyal to?" "The truth," I said, "and the patients whose lives depend on that algorithm working correctly." That gave him pause. "What are you talking about?" So I told him. Not everything, not the 6 weeks of planning and preparation, but the essential truth. The conversation I'd overheard, the falsified clinical trial data, the plan to frame me for Marcus's fraud, the discovery that hospitals were deploying a system that was nowhere near as accurate as advertised. Trevor listened in silence, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to horror as the pieces clicked into place. Jesus, he said finally, sinking onto my couch. The clinical trials. I reviewed some of that code. There were inconsistencies, but Marcus said it was just database synchronization issues. He said you were handling it. He was setting me up, making sure my digital fingerprints were on everything so that when the FDA investigation eventually found the fraud, I'd be the obvious suspect. And the algorithm? It's really only 81% accurate, yes, which is still good, still valuable, but not worth $2 billion, and not safe to deploy without proper validation. Trevor put his head in his hands. How long have you known? 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He looked up at me. You've been lying to me for 6 weeks, pretending everything was fine, pretending to be my friend while you were planning to blow up the company. I was protecting you. If you'd known, you would have been implicated, or Marcus would have fired you too. Or you would have felt obligated to report me. I couldn't risk any of those things, so you just, what? Decided you knew better than everyone? Decided to play God with 300 people's livelihoods. I felt anger flash through me, hot and clean. Those 300 people work for a company that's committing fraud. A company that's putting patients at risk. What was I supposed to do, Trevor? Keep quiet and let Marcus get away with it because it was convenient? You could have gone to the police 6 weeks ago and given Marcus time to destroy evidence and build his defense. Time to complete the IPO and cash out before anyone realized what was happening? No, I had to time this perfectly. Time it perfectly, Trevor repeated. You mean you had to make sure you got fired publicly so you could play the victim while you detonated your little bomb? That stung because it was partially true. Marcus was going to fire me anyway. I just accelerated the timeline and controlled the circumstances. Trevor stood. I don't even know you. The Amanda I thought I knew would never do something like this. Would never be this calculating, this cold. The Amanda you thought you knew was a naive idiot who believed hard work and integrity mattered. My voice was louder than I intended. That Amanda got used and manipulated and set up to take the fall for someone else's crimes. So, yes, I changed. I learned. I stopped trusting people who didn't deserve it, including me. The question hung between us, heavy with hurt. Including everyone, I said quietly. Trevor nodded slowly. Well, congratulations, you won. Marcus's life is destroyed, the company is collapsing, and you're going to be a rich woman when this is all over. I hope it was worth it. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. For what it's worth, I believe you, about the fraud, about Marcus setting you up, about all of it. But I also think you could have found another way, a way that didn't hurt so many innocent people. Name one, I challenged. He couldn't. After a long moment, he opened the door and left. I stood alone in my apartment, listening to his footsteps recede down the hallway, feeling the weight of his words settle over me like a shroud. Had I done the right thing? The legal thing, yes. The just thing, probably. But the right thing? I didn't know anymore. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on as night fell. Somewhere out there, Marcus Ashford was plotting his defense. Pierce Donovan was calling lawyers. 300 Tech Vista employees were updating their resumes and wondering how they'd pay their mortgages. And I was here, alone, victorious and vindicated and utterly isolated. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. You think you've won, but this is just beginning. I will destroy you for what you've done. I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. You will regret this for the rest of your life. M. Marcus. Threatening me even now, even after everything. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Alexandra Torres with a brief note. Exhibit A for the witness intimidation charges. Then I blocked the number and finished my wine. Tomorrow, the news would break. My name would be public. The story would spread across tech blogs and business journals and social media. Some people would call me a hero, others would call me a traitor. Most wouldn't care as long as the story was entertaining. But tonight, I was alone with my choices. And despite everything, despite Trevor's hurt and the employees' uncertain futures and the complexity of what came next, I didn't regret it. Marcus Ashford had made the mistake of underestimating me, of thinking I was weak, naive, someone who could be used and discarded without consequences. He'd learned better. And now the world would too. Tuesday morning, I woke to my phone exploding with notifications, emails, texts, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, friend requests on social media from journalists and strangers. My story had gone viral overnight, spreading across the internet like wildfire through dry brush. I lay in bed, scrolling through the headlines on my phone. Tech whistleblower exposes 2B fraud at healthcare startup female engineer takes down. CEO who tried to frame her Tech Vista solutions faces federal investigation after damning allegations. From firing to federal case, one woman's revenge on her boss. Some of the articles were sympathetic. They painted me as a brave truth-teller, a David taking on Goliath. They interviewed former employees who confirmed the toxic culture at Tech Vista, who described Marcus as tyrannical and Pierce as ruthless. Others were less kind. They focused on the collapsed IPO, the jobs in jeopardy, my potential financial windfall. One particularly nasty opinion piece in a tech blog called me a cautionary tale about what happens when personal grievances masquerade as principled whistleblowing. I made coffee and opened my laptop. My personal email inbox was flooded. Job offers from competitors who saw me as either brilliant or notorious enough to be valuable. Interview requests from every major news outlet, messages from former colleagues, some supportive, most angry. One from my college roommate asking if I was okay and reminding me that her couch was available if I needed to escape Portland for a while. And buried in the noise, an email that made my heart stop. It was from Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the chief of cardiology at Providence Medical Center, one of the hospitals in Tech Vista's clinical trial. The subject line read, "You saved my patient's life." I clicked it open with trembling fingers. "Ms. Pierce, you don't know me, but I know your work. I've been using the Tech Vista algorithm for 6 months as part of the clinical trial. Yesterday, after reading the news about the fraud investigation, I went back and reviewed every case where the algorithm had made a prediction. 3 weeks ago, the algorithm flagged a patient, a 42-year-old woman, as low risk for cardiac events. Based on that assessment, we scheduled her for outpatient monitoring rather than immediate intervention. But something felt wrong to me. Her symptoms didn't match the algorithm's confidence level. So I overrode the recommendation and admitted her for observation. She had a massive heart attack 6 hours later. We were able to intervene immediately because she was already in the hospital. If I'd trusted the algorithm, if I'd followed its recommendation, she would have been at home. She would have died. I went back and reran her data through the algorithm this morning, checking the probability scores. The system had rated her risk at 23%. But when I manually reviewed her case against the clinical literature, her actual risk was closer to 78%. Your algorithm was wrong. And if you hadn't exposed that wrongness, I would have continued trusting it. Other doctors would have continued trusting it. Patients would have died. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Regardless of the personal cost, you saved lives, including the life of that 42-year-old woman who gets to go home to her 2 children. You are a hero, whether anyone else recognizes it or not. Respectfully, Dr. Yuki Tanaka. I read the email 3 times, feeling something crack open in my chest. Something that had been locked tight and frozen since that night 6 weeks ago when I'd discovered Marcus's betrayal. This was why I'd done it. Not for revenge, though that had been part of it. Not for money, though the Quitam percentage would indeed be substantial. But for this. For the patients whose lives depended on accurate information. For the doctors who needed to trust their tools. For the fundamental principle that truth mattered more than profit. I wiped my eyes and typed a response. Dr. Tanaka, thank you for this message. You have no idea how much it means to me. Please give that patient my best wishes for her recovery. And thank you for trusting your instincts over the algorithm. That's exactly what good doctors should do. Sincerely, Amanda. I hit send and sat back, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not vindication, not triumph, just peace. My phone rang. Alexandra Torres. Have you seen the news? She asked without preamble. I've seen it. Good. We need to talk about media strategy. Every outlet in the country wants an interview. We need to control the narrative. What narrative is that? That you're a principled whistleblower who discovered fraud and reported it at great personal risk. Not a vengeful employee who destroyed a company out of spite. Both things can be true, Alexandra. Not in court, they can't. The defense is going to paint you as vindictive and greedy. We need to counter that with a consistent message. You're a woman who saw wrongdoing, tried to address it through proper channels, and only went public when you had no other choice. But that's not entirely true. I didn't try internal channels. I went straight to building a legal case, because you knew internal channels would fail. You'd overheard Marcus and Pierce discussing how they were setting you up. Any reasonable person would have done what you did. That's the story. I thought about Dr. Tanaka's email, about that 42-year-old mother who was alive because one doctor had been cautious, about the hundreds or thousands of other patients who might have died if Tech Vista's fraud had continued. Fine, I said. What do you need from me? I've set up an interview with 60 Minutes for next week. In the meantime, no social media, no unauthorized interviews, no public statements. Everything goes through me first. Understood? Understood. And Amanda, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Marcus has hired the best crisis management firm in the country. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life. Every relationship, every mistake, every vulnerable moment. They'll find your pressure points and exploit them. Are you ready for that? I thought about my father, about his chess lessons, about how the best players anticipated not just the next move, but the next 10 moves. I'm ready, I said. But I wasn't, not really, because over the next week, I learned that being right doesn't protect you from being destroyed. The counterattack began on Wednesday, 48 hours after the injunction was granted. It started subtly. A blog post on a tech news site, supposedly written by an anonymous Tech Vista employee, describing me as difficult to work with, territorial about my code, and increasingly paranoid in the weeks before my termination. The post included carefully selected details, like the time I'd snapped at a junior engineer who'd accidentally corrupted a database, or the instance when I'd skipped a company retreat because I was too busy, that were technically true but stripped of all context. Then came the social media campaign, fake accounts posting about how I'd destroyed hundreds of jobs and sabotaged a company that was trying to save lives. Memes showing me as a villainous figure, photoshopped images, hashtags like Nuggy Amanda Pierce is the real fraud trending on Twitter. By Thursday, mainstream outlets were picking up the counter-narrative. Whistleblower or saboteur? Asked one headline. The dark side of revenge, when personal grievances masquerade as justice, proclaimed another. And then, on Friday morning, Marcus Ashford gave an interview to Bloomberg. I watched it on my laptop, sitting cross-legged on my couch with cold coffee and a sick feeling in my stomach. Marcus looked different. Gone was the arrogant executive from his birthday party. In his place sat a humbled, devastated man who'd been betrayed by someone I trusted like a daughter. His voice cracked at strategic moments. His eyes were red-rimmed, as if he'd been crying. I believed in Amanda, he told the interviewer, a sharp woman named Victoria Chen. No, I couldn't use that name. Victoria Park. I recruited her personally. I mentored her. I gave her opportunities that other companies wouldn't have, and this is how she repays me, by lying to federal investigators and destroying everything we built together? You're saying her allegations are false? Victoria asked. I'm saying they're grossly misrepresented. Yes, there were some inconsistencies in the clinical trial data. That happens in any large-scale study. Amanda knew that. She was part of the team working to address those inconsistencies. But instead of working with us to fix the issues, she weaponized them. She took normal scientific variation and spun it into this narrative of deliberate fraud. The FBI seems to think there's merit to her claims. The FBI has been misled. Amanda is a brilliant engineer, but she's also unstable. Her behavior became increasingly erratic in the months before her termination. She was missing deadlines, making mistakes, behaving inappropriately with colleagues. We had to let her go for the good of the company. And the timing, firing her at your birthday party. Marcus had the decency to look ashamed. That was a mistake. I won't defend it. I should have handled her termination privately, but I was frustrated and angry, and I made a poor decision. But a poor decision isn't the same as a criminal conspiracy. The interview continued for another 15 minutes. Marcus painted himself as the victim, a man who'd built a company with noble intentions, only to be torn down by a disgruntled employee with a grudge. He talked about the 300 employees who'd lost their jobs or faced uncertainty. He mentioned the hospitals who'd seen genuine improvements in patient outcomes using the algorithm. He even teared up when discussing a letter he'd supposedly received from a doctor whose patient had been saved by the system. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and it was working. By Friday afternoon, the tide of public opinion had shifted. The comments on news articles were increasingly skeptical of my motives. Twitter debates raged about whether I was a hero or a villain. Someone created a GoFundMe for Tech Vista employees affected by Amanda Pierce's vendetta, which raised $50,000 in the first day. I sat in my apartment, watching my reputation disintegrate in real time, feeling helpless and furious and terrified. My phone rang. Trevor. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. I'm sorry. His voice was hoarse. Amanda, I'm so sorry. For what? For being angry? For not understanding? I just watched Marcus's interview and I realized he's lying about everything. The way he described you, the way he framed what happened. I know you. I worked with you for years. You're not unstable. You're not vindictive. You're the most careful, methodical person I've ever met. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you. And I checked something. Remember how Marcus said there were some inconsistencies in the clinical data that you were helping to address? Yes. I pulled up the email threads from 6 months ago. You weren't part of any team addressing inconsistencies. You weren't even copied on those discussions. Marcus and Pierce were handling all of that themselves, specifically excluding engineering from the conversation. Trevor, he's lying, Amanda. He's lying about your involvement, about your behavior, about everything, and I can prove it. Something stirred in my chest. Hope, maybe. What do you mean? I kept copies of everything. Every email, every code review, every meeting note from the past 3 years, it's all time-stamped and authenticated. If Marcus wants to claim you were behaving erratically, I can show that you were consistently professional and brilliant right up until the day he fired you. If he wants to claim you were part of the team addressing data inconsistencies, I can prove you were deliberately excluded. Trevor, if you help me, you'll become a target too. Marcus will come after you. I know. There was a pause. But I can't watch you go through this alone. Not when I know the truth. Not when I can help. Why are you doing this? Because you were right. About Marcus, about the fraud, about all of it, and because someone needs to have your back. I closed my eyes, feeling gratitude wash over me like warm water. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Marcus is scared, and scared people are dangerous. He had no idea how right he was. The weekend brought a brief respite from the media frenzy, but Monday morning delivered a devastating new blow. Marcus and Pierce, through their attorneys, filed a countersuit against me for breach of contract, theft of trade secrets, and defamation. They were seeking $200 million in damages. $200 million, more money than I would ever have in my lifetime. It's an intimidation tactic, Alexandra assured me over the phone. They know they can't win, but they can bankrupt you trying to defend yourself, and they can create enough noise to muddy the waters of the criminal case. Can they actually collect if they win? They won't win. But even if they did, you don't have $200 million. They'd get whatever assets you have, your apartment, your savings, and that's it. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. So they'd destroy me financially. They'd try. But we're not going to let that happen. We're filing a motion to dismiss based on SLAPP statutes, Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. Oregon has strong protections for whistleblowers against retaliatory lawsuits. But the damage was done. The countersuit made headlines. TechVista fights back. 200 Matas Morris lawsuit against whistleblower. Read the banner on every tech news site. The narrative shifted again. Now I wasn't just a possible liar. I was being actively challenged in court by the people I'd accused. My mother called from Boston, her voice tight with worry. "Amanda, sweetheart, I'm seeing your name everywhere. Are you okay? Do you need to come home?" "I'm fine, Mom. You don't sound fine. You sound exhausted." I was exhausted. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in a week. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus's interview, his crocodile tears, his carefully constructed victimhood. "The trial is going to be long," I told her, "but I'm on the right side of this. The evidence is clear. Evidence doesn't matter if they destroy you before you get to present it." My mother had always been practical to the point of bluntness. "These are powerful men, Amanda, men with resources and connections. They're not going to let you ruin them without a fight, I know. Then please be careful, watch your back, and consider coming home for a while, getting out of Portland until this blows over. It's not going to blow over, Mom. This is my life now, at least for the next year or two." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your father would be proud of you." That broke something in me. Tears came suddenly, unexpectedly. Would he? Or would he think I was reckless, stupid, that I should have found a quieter way? "Your father," my mother said firmly, "believed that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight is unwinnable, especially when the fight is unwinnable. He would have told you that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." I wiped my eyes. I miss him. I know. I miss him too. But he's with you, Amanda. In everything you do. In how you think, how you plan, how you refuse to back down when you know you're right. After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about my father. About the chess games we'd played at the kitchen table. His patient voice explaining strategy and sacrifice and the long game. About how he'd taught me that losing a piece wasn't the same as losing the match. I'd lost pieces in this fight, my job, my reputation, my privacy, friendships, peace of mind. But I hadn't lost the match, not yet. Tuesday brought the 60 Minutes interview. A crew arrived at my apartment at 8 in the morning. Producers, camera operators, lighting technicians, makeup artists, and transformed my living room into a television studio. The correspondent, a woman named Catherine Morrison, no, I couldn't use that name either. A woman named Catherine Wheeler, who'd been with the show for 20 years and had a reputation for tough but fair interviews. She sat across from me in my own living room, now alien with lights and equipment, and got straight to business. "Ms. Pierce, let's address the elephant in the room. Your former employer has accused you of fabricating evidence, of being motivated by revenge and greed. How do you respond?" I'd rehearsed this with Alexandra a dozen times. Stay calm. Stay factual. Don't get emotional. "The evidence speaks for itself," I said. "I didn't fabricate anything. Every document, every email, every piece of data I provided to federal investigators is authentic and verifiable. Marcus Ashford and Pierce Donovan can call me whatever names they want, but they can't change the facts. But you did benefit from reporting this fraud, didn't you? If the government recovers damages, you stand to receive millions of dollars. That's how qui tam lawsuits work. The False Claims Act includes financial incentives because reporting fraud is dangerous. People who blow the whistle often lose their jobs, their reputations, sometimes their freedom if the companies they expose have enough power to retaliate. The financial reward is meant to encourage people to come forward despite those risks. So you admit money was a motivating factor, justice was the motivating factor. The potential financial recovery is a consequence of seeking justice, not the reason for it. Catherine leaned forward slightly. Let's talk about your termination. You were fired at Mr. Ashford's birthday party in front of 300 people. That must have been humiliating. It was. Some people might say that humiliation gave you a motive for revenge, that this lawsuit is less about fraud and more about getting back at someone who hurt you. This was the critical moment, the question that would determine how the public perceived me. You're right that I was humiliated, I said slowly. You're right that I was angry. But I didn't discover the fraud after I was fired. I discovered it 6 weeks before. I overheard Marcus and Pierce discussing how they'd been falsifying clinical trial data and how they planned to frame me for it. From that moment, I knew I had to act. But you didn't go to the authorities immediately. You waited. Some might say you were planning your revenge. I was planning my case. There's a difference. If I'd gone to the FBI the day after I overheard that conversation, Marcus and Pierce would have had time to destroy evidence, to build their defense, to complete their IPO, and cash out before anyone realized what was happening. I needed to time my disclosure carefully to maximize the chance of justice and minimize the harm to patients. Patience. This was my opening, the moment I'd been waiting for. Catherine, the algorithm I developed, is being used in hospitals to make life and death decisions. Doctors are relying on it to determine which patients need immediate intervention and which can wait. If that algorithm is less accurate than advertised, and it is, people die. That's not speculation, that's math. An 81% accuracy rate means the system is wrong 19% of the time. In a hospital treating thousands of patients, that's hundreds of wrong predictions. Some of those wrong predictions will kill people. I pulled out my phone and opened Dr. Tanaka's email, which I'd gotten permission to share. This is from a cardiologist who's been using the algorithm. She describes a case where the system predicted low risk for a patient who actually had a 78% chance of a cardiac event. The doctor overrode the algorithm and saved that patient's life. If she'd trusted the system, if she'd believed the 94% accuracy rate that TechVista was advertising, her patient would be dead. Catherine read the email on camera, her expression shifting from skeptical to concerned. That's what this is about, I continued. Not revenge, not money, saving lives, making sure doctors have accurate information, holding companies accountable when they lie about products that people literally trust with their lives. The interview continued for another hour. Catherine asked about my background, my relationship with Marcus, the specifics of the fraud, my plans for the future. I answered everything as honestly as I could, knowing that every word would be dissected and analysed by millions of viewers. When it was finally over, when the crew had packed up their equipment and left, I collapsed on my couch, exhausted but hopeful. I'd said what needed to be said. I'd told my story in my own words. Now I just had to hope people would listen. The 60-minute segment aired that Sunday night, and everything changed again. The interview was powerful. Even I could see that, watching it with a critical eye. Catherine Wheeler had edited it expertly, interspersing my testimony with footage of hospitals, interviews with other doctors who'd noticed problems with the algorithm, and damning graphics showing the discrepancy between TechVista's claimed accuracy and the actual results. But the real turning point was Dr. Tanaka's email. Seeing it read aloud on national television, hearing the story of that 42-year-old mother who'd nearly died because of a faulty prediction, that made it real for people. That transformed me from an abstract whistleblower into someone who'd potentially saved lives. By Monday morning, public opinion had shifted again. My social media feeds were flooded with supportive messages. Istand with Amanda was trending. Other doctors came forward with their own stories of the algorithm's failures, cases where they'd had to override its predictions to prevent patient harm. And then, Tuesday afternoon, the dam broke completely. 3 former TechVista employees came forward with their own evidence of fraud. Engineers who'd been told to manipulate data. Accountants who'd seen the financial projections and known they were impossible. Sales representatives who'd been given scripts containing claims they knew were false. One of them was Bethany from accounting, the woman who'd cried when I was fired. She appeared on CNN with her own attorney, holding documents that showed Pierce Donovan had personally ordered her to exclude certain expenses from financial reports to make the company appear more profitable than it was. I was told it was standard practice, Bethany said, her voice shaking but determined. I was told all tech companies did this kind of creative accounting before an IPO, but I knew it was wrong. I knew it was fraud. And when I saw what Amanda had done, how she'd stood up and told the truth despite everything it cost her, I realized I had to do the same. The floodgates opened. By Wednesday, a dozen more employees had come forward. The FBI expanded its investigation. The SEC opened its own inquiry into securities fraud. The FDA suspended TechVista's participation in all clinical trials and issued a safety warning about the algorithm. And Marcus Ashford's carefully constructed defense began to crumble. His lawyers withdrew the countersuit against me, citing new information that has come to light. Translation, they realized they'd lose and decided to cut their losses. The crisis management firm stopped responding to media inquiries. Marcus himself went silent, refusing all interview requests. But Pierce Donovan, apparently, had other plans. On Thursday morning, news broke that Pierce had reached a plea agreement with federal prosecutors. In exchange for his testimony against Marcus and a reduced sentence, he was providing evidence of the full scope of the fraud, including documents that proved Marcus had personally overseen the falsification of clinical trial data. Pierce Donovan was always the smarter of the two, Alexandra told me over coffee at a downtown cafe. We'd started meeting in person now that the media frenzy had calmed slightly. He saw which way the wind was blowing and decided to save himself. Classic rat leaving a sinking ship. What does this mean for the case? It means we have an insider witness with documentary evidence. It means the criminal case against Marcus is essentially airtight, and it means you're no longer the sole witness, which should take some of the pressure off you. And for me, the Qui Tam lawsuit, strong, very strong. With multiple witnesses and Pierce's cooperation, the government will almost certainly recover significant damages from TechVista. Your percentage could be substantial. We're talking tens of millions of dollars, tens of millions. The number was almost incomprehensible. I'd spent 8 years making a good but not extraordinary salary, living modestly, saving carefully. Now I was potentially looking at generational wealth. What about Marcus? I asked. Alexandra's smile was cold. Marcus is looking at 10 to 20 years in federal prison. Healthcare fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The prosecutors are throwing everything at him, and with Pierce's testimony, he has no defense. I should have felt triumphant. This was what I'd wanted. Marcus held accountable, the fraud exposed, justice served. But instead, I felt something more complex. Relief, yes. Vindication, certainly. But also a strange sadness for what could have been. For the company we might have built if Marcus had been honest. For the lives we might have saved if the algorithm had been properly validated instead of fraudulently marketed. You did the right thing, Alexandra said, reading my expression. Don't second-guess yourself now. I'm not second-guessing. I'm just processing. 8 years of my life went into that company, into that algorithm, and now it's all ashes. It's not all ashes. The algorithm still exists, it still works, just not as well as Marcus claimed. Some hospital system will buy it out of bankruptcy and deploy it properly, with honest accuracy rates and appropriate medical oversight. Your work will still save lives, Amanda. Just not in the way you originally imagined. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowledge didn't ease the ache of watching something I'd built with my own hands become a cautionary tale. My phone buzzed. A text from Trevor. Have you seen the latest news? I opened Twitter. The The top trending topic was an Osmori Marcus, Ashford arrested. He'd been taken into custody that morning. The photo showed him being led out of his house in handcuffs, his face grey, his eyes hollow. Gone was the confident executive, the charismatic leader, the man who'd recruited me with promises of changing the world. In his place was a criminal, caught and caged and broken. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to feel something other than empty. "Are you okay?" Alexandra asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought this would feel different. I thought I'd feel victorious, powerful, something. But I just feel tired. That's normal. Revenge, even justified revenge, rarely feels as good as we think it will. This wasn't revenge, wasn't it? At least a little." I thought about that night at his birthday party, about walking up to that platform, knowing what was coming, about the smile I'd given him, the smile that said I knew, I'd always known, and he'd walked right into my trap. "Maybe," I said finally, "maybe a little." The trial began 3 months later in January. The weather had turned properly miserable, Portland winter in full force, with rain that felt personal and cold that seeped into your bones. I'd spent the holidays mostly alone, declining my mother's invitation to come to Boston for Christmas. I needed space, time, distance from everything that had happened. The courthouse was packed every day. Marcus's trial had become a media sensation, a story about corporate greed, betrayed trust, and the little guy, well, little woman, taking on the powerful and winning. Journalists lined up hours before the doors opened. Sketch artists captured every moment. Legal analysts dissected each day's testimony on cable news. I testified for 3 days. Alexandra walked me through my entire story, the discovery of the fraud, the overheard conversation, the 6 weeks of preparation, the decision to wait until after being fired to come forward. The defense attorneys tried to shake me, tried to paint me as vindictive and calculated, but the evidence was overwhelming. Pierce Donovan testified for 5 days. He was gaunt and nervous, clearly terrified of going to prison despite his plea agreement. But his testimony was devastating. He described in detail how he and Marcus had planned the fraud, how they'd manipulated the clinical trial data, how they'd specifically set me up to take the fall. Marcus was obsessed with Amanda, Pierce said at one point. He talked about her constantly, how brilliant she was, how dangerous her knowledge made her, how we needed to control her. Firing her at the party wasn't spontaneous. We planned it for weeks. Marcus wanted to humiliate her publicly so that when she inevitably objected to what we were doing, no one would take her seriously. He wanted to destroy her credibility preemptively. The courtroom had gone silent at that revelation. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that Marcus had calculated my humiliation as a strategic move, made something cold and hard settle in my chest. The defense tried to discredit Pierce, arguing that he was lying to save himself. But the documentary evidence supported everything he said. Emails, financial records, meeting notes. The paper trail was impossible to deny. Dr. Tanaka testified about the patient who'd nearly died. Other doctors testified about similar cases. Bethany and the other former employees testified about the culture of fraud at Tech Vista. The FBI forensic accountants testified about the financial manipulations. And through it all, Marcus sat at the defense table, his face a mask of controlled rage. His attorneys had advised him not to testify, a smart move, since cross-examination would have destroyed him. But his silence spoke volumes. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts: guilty. Marcus Ashford was convicted of healthcare fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and multiple counts of obstruction of justice. He showed no emotion when the verdict was read, just sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. But when he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, when he passed by where I was sitting with Alexandra, he turned to look at me. And in that moment, I saw not rage but something else. Resignation, maybe, or acceptance. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but the marshals pulled him along before any words came out. I never saw him again, not in person anyway. I followed his sentencing hearing remotely, watching via video link as the judge gave him 18 years in federal prison. I saw photos of him being transferred to a facility in California. I read articles about how he was adjusting to prison life, about his failed appeals, about his divorce proceedings when his wife left him. But those were just images, stories. The Marcus Ashford I'd known, mentor, villain, brilliant entrepreneur, systematic fraudster, no longer existed. He'd been reduced to a cautionary tale, a name in the annals of corporate fraud. And I had reduced him. The settlement came through in March. The federal government recovered $847 million from TechVista's bankruptcy proceedings. Money that would go back to Medicare, Medicaid, and the hospital systems that had been defrauded. Under the False Claims Act, my share was 28% of that amount. $237 million. I stared at the number in my bank account for a long time, trying to make it feel real. It didn't. It felt like monopoly money, like a typo, like something that couldn't possibly be mine. "What are you going to do with it?" Trevor asked. We were having coffee at our usual place on Hawthorne. Our friendship had slowly rebuilt over the months, though it would never be quite the same as before. Some fractures heal, but leave visible scars. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's too much money. It's more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. You could retire, travel the world, buy a house in every city. I could. But that feels wrong somehow. Like I'm profiting from other people's suffering. You're profiting from exposing fraud. That's literally what the law is designed to incentivize. I know. But still. I'd been thinking about this for weeks, actually. What to do with money I never expected to have. Money that came from bringing down a company I'd helped build. "I'm going to start a foundation," I said finally, "for healthcare algorithm validation. I'll fund independent testing of medical AI systems to make sure they actually work as advertised. I'll support whistleblowers who expose fraud in healthcare tech. I'll make sure what happened at TechVista doesn't happen again." Trevor smiled. "Your father would approve." "You think so?" "I know so. He taught you chess, right? Taught you to think strategically, to see the whole board." "Yes. Well, you just played the longest game I've ever seen. 43 days of preparation, 6 months of legal proceedings, and now you're using your winnings to change the system that allowed the fraud in the first place. That's not just revenge. That's legacy. Legacy." The word Marcus had used at his birthday party just before he fired me. "You're building something that's going to change healthcare forever. That's going to be your legacy." He'd been right, just not in the way he'd intended. I did end up starting the foundation, the Pierce Foundation for Healthcare Algorithm Integrity. It launched in June with a board of doctors, engineers, ethicists, and patient advocates. We began funding independent validation studies of medical AI systems. We created grants for whistleblowers to support them through the legal process. We lobbied for stronger regulations requiring third-party testing of healthcare algorithms before deployment. And slowly, quietly, I began to rebuild my life. I bought a small house in the hills outside Portland with a view of the city but enough distance to feel separate from it. I adopted a dog, a rescue pit bull named Athena, who'd been abused by her previous owner and now spent her days sleeping in patches of sunlight and her nights curled up at the foot of my bed. I started teaching, adjunct professor at Portland State University, a course on ethics in software engineering. My students were brilliant and idealistic, just like I'd been at their age. I tried to prepare them for a world that would test that idealism, that would offer them impossible choices between integrity and advancement. The right choice isn't always the easy choice, I told them on the first day of class. Sometimes it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Sometimes it costs you everything you thought you wanted. But if you can look at yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing, that's worth more than any salary, any promotion, any success. Some of them believed me. Others thought I was naive. All of them listened. I also reconnected with old friends, made new ones, started dating again. Not seriously, I wasn't ready for serious, but enough to remember that I was human, that I had needs and wants beyond exposing corporate fraud and rebuilding my reputation. One date, with the environmental lawyer named Patrick, who had kind eyes and no connection to the tech industry, asked me about the Tech Vista case. "Do you regret it?" he asked over dinner. "What you did? Which part?" "Any of it. All of it. The way it happened." I thought about that night at Marcus's party, about Trevor's hurt, about the 300 employees who'd lost their jobs, about Marcus in prison, about the millions of dollars I'd earned by destroying the company I'd helped build. My boss fired me at his birthday party. 2 days later, I sent him a gift he'll never forget.